Hi, I'm DeCusatis. I work for Meetup as a core engineer, and around this time last year, I founded a feminist hackerspace in New York City. So you can @mention me if you want as precise memory, and hashtag inclusive gender to connect with other people here. One more thing, my pronouns are she and her. So what I'm going to be talking about today is first an overview of why gender matters, and gender identity, what it is, why it affects those of us who build products that people use. After that, I'm going to go into ways that people currently collect gender information and how they can do so in an inclusive manner. And then lastly, a GitHub project I started called Gender Amender, which is a new way of collecting gender information that bridges inclusivity and respectful data collection. So let's get started. I'm actually going to ask a question of the audience to start. How many of you use Facebook? Raise your hand, please. OK, that's most people. How many of you use Gmail? Pretty much everyone, I think. And how many of you registered online to attend PyCon? Everyone, I hope. So I just want you to keep that in mind when I'm going through these next few slides. I'm going to come back to it in a second. So what is gender exactly? I want to ground you. I want to make sure we're all on the same page here. I like to think about what gender is by thinking about what it isn't. So I'm going to start with some common misconceptions. Gender identity is not how you dress alone. It's not your physical characteristics or chromosomes that you might have in your body. It's not whom you're attracted to. And it's not really about what things you buy or like either. So what gender identity is, it's how you feel and how you want to be perceived by the world. So a lot of people feel either male or female, but some people feel neither or both or something else entirely. So why am I here in front of you all talking about gender at this tech conference? I want to tell you a story. I took this picture a couple months ago. I was playing on our Wii U. I was playing Super Mario Maker, and the conceit of that game is you build levels and then other people play them. So I built a level, and I wanted to show it to my friends so they could play it. Before I could do that, I had to make a Nintendo account. And as part of doing that, I was shown this screen. So I had to click through either male or female, which didn't really have anything to do with the level I was making or my friend who I wanted to show it to. But I had to select either male or female to proceed to the next step and play the game. So gender is everywhere in our society, and it's reflected in the technology we use. I don't mean to call out it's like Nintendo is awful. That's not what I'm trying to say. It's not just Nintendo, it's everyone. So gender is the first thing that gets asked about you. Even before you're born, people ask, is it a boy or a girl? And that continues throughout your life. The options that you're given shape your perception of reality, and your perception of reality shapes the options you create when you're making something with technology. So I asked a couple minutes ago about Facebook and about Gmail. About 1 in 7 people in the whole world use Facebook. Again, about the same amount, 1 in 7 people use Gmail. So when you sign up for Facebook and Gmail, and also when you signed up for PyCon, you were asked to share information about your gender identity with people using the while you were using the website. So my prior example, and many others, they have male and female as options, and that's it. This leaves people out. So it's hard to tell how many people it leaves out, because a lot of times when people talk about LGBT statistics, what they're actually talking about is LGB statistics, only the sexuality portion of the acronym, not the gender identity part. It's also hard to determine how many people are affected, because it's just not safe in a lot of places to admit if you're gender nonconforming. So despite the difficulty, I tried to find you some statistics anyway. Since I'm a millennial, I started at Wikipedia. The Wikipedia article for LGBT demographics of the United States, I chose that because I live in the US. We're in the US now. A lot of tech companies whose products I use are based in the US. And while it's not always safe, for the most part, it's not actively illegal to admit that you're LGBT here. So I looked at this Wikipedia article, and what I found was there was, of the surveys that talked about transgender people, there were 2, they were about 10 years old each, and they only counted people actively going to doctors making gender transitions as transgender. And I feel that that means that I can't get any meaningful information out of them. It's not useful because, like, they're not based on self-identification. Every person is an expert on their own self. Your identity is based on what you think it is, not what doctors you go to, what procedures you're going through, not what other people think you might be. So some of you might also remember that there was a survey last year called the US Trans Survey. Unfortunately, the data for this is not yet available. It says on the website that it will be in mid-2016, and I'm really looking forward to hearing some more accurate statistics on this. In conclusion, I don't really have a hard number for you. I have some other ways of framing the problem of determining the impact of a non-inclusive field, though. Sarah Wachter-Butcher is a content strategy consultant. She gave a talk last year that I saw online called Everybody Hurts, Content for Kindness. And in it, she talks about this concept of what is an edge case. She says that we should call them stress cases, not edge cases, because the things which cause designs to break should be placed front and center, as opposed to being, kind of left on the edge. You don't have to worry about it, you don't have to focus on it. And in other words, it isn't about how many people are affected only, but it's about how you affect them. And so I also want to say that this matters because, not just because of some percentage of people who might select something other than male or female, but because it's visible to everyone. And it makes people think about what they're asking for, what is gender in their world. But luckily, times are changing. These fields are not only always male or female, especially lately. So I want to talk about what the problems people trying to collect gender in an inclusive manner face and the solutions that they've found so far. This comes from one of my favorite resources about asking about gender. It's Practice Makes Progress, and the quote says, "Before we talk about what doing it right looks like, first we have to talk about why we ask about gender. So the simplest way to collect gender in an inclusive manner is that you don't ask. It's zero dev time to build a feature that is irrelevant, and you're done." So because our apps, like I said, they reflect our reality, sometimes we do need some sort of gender identification built in. So next step up from that is an open text field. The self-identification via text is the only way to ask about gender that's detailed and meaningful for everyone involved, because everyone experiences gender differently. So, like, this is the only thing, everyone is different. But that doesn't mean that you have to use an open text field. It just means that if you're not using one, you should be aware of your limitations. And sometimes you can't use an open text field. Like, for example, sometimes you want to do some processing of the data that you get. So one example of that is Facebook. They serve ads. I work for Meetup. We don't serve ads, but we do have recommendations. So Meetup groups are tagged with whether they are for men or women or all or not. And so the tagging of the groups and the profiles of the members are corresponding, and we determine whether you see or recommended certain groups based on what your gender is and what the gender of the groups is. So just because we're doing that, does that mean we need to have like a male, female, that's it? No, it does not. But it doesn't mean we're limited to things that are mutually exclusive. So this is something that Facebook does. You can select a custom gender, and you can type whatever you want. And this is meant to be a balance between making it easy to collect meaningful data about the majority of people who don't select custom, who select male or female, but also allowing people who do feel that they are not male or female to represent themselves authentically. I think this is a great start. I also wish that it was just as easy for non-binary people to select something as it was for the male and female people. Here's what Google Plus does. They also have custom. I want to note that I have used the word custom on these two slides, not the word other. The word other is othering. The details of this matter because if you're being told in a million other ways by society that you don't belong as a non-binary person, then why would you want your site to add to that and make it harder for you to be who you are? So one more of these, I have OkCupid, which you can select any of these tags, up to 5 of them. And I think that's great as long as you have up to 5 of the 24 tags which you feel describe you. So that's it. There's one more thing before I move on. I want to note that the scope of this talk is focused on gender collection. So displaying that gender to other people on your site is something you want to be very careful about and very deliberate about because you're putting trans people in danger if you out them. So don't do that. Be clear about what you're doing when you're asking for this, how it's going to be used is the best recommendation that I can give if you want to ask for this and display it to others. Let people decide for themselves what they're comfortable writing and let them know how others will see it. So this example is from Facebook again, and you can see it says, your preferred pronoun is public and can be seen by anyone on my screenshot. And that's an example of letting people know what they're showing others. So I created a GitHub project. The goal of this project is to have a field where you can represent all genders, but still have robust data collection without it being too complicated. So the core of my project is a JSON list with metadata about genders. You can pick as many options as you want, and anyone can add to it via pull request because it's open. I'm going to do a demo. This is my gender dropdown example. You type in the field, and I'm going to type a couple examples. You could say that you are an androgynous, cis man, for example. Or you could say that you are a trans woman. Or, for one more example, you could say that you are a queer person, maybe. So that's Gender Amender, my project in action. Back to my slides. This is also, by the way, a slightly different version available on my website. There's the link. It'll be visible later, too. So like I said, there's this JSON dict that's at the center of this, the core of this. This data source has words that could be part of a gender, and then an integer mapping which represents what gender they might be a part of. This whole list is kind of overwhelming to look at all at once, but luckily you don't have to make some use of it. So my first example, you could say that you're an androgynous cis man, and you can see that androgynous and cis are non-gendered, but they're still meaningful to you. You chose them for a reason. So, like, it's personally important to you. But the man part has its male, and that's indicative to us when we're recommending things to you, what you might want. My other example, you could be a trans woman. And trans women are trans, but they're women, so that's the important part. So they can select that they are women instead of having to select some other category. They can be gendered by our system as women. Or you could also be maybe like not sure what you want to write. You don't want to write everything of your complicated identity into this little text field. So if you're a queer person, then queer and person are non-gendered, but the question mark says something else about your identity and that it doesn't fit into a binary framework. So I put it in a bucket called non-binary, and I think that that's a good umbrella word for it. Maybe you don't. If you don't, please submit a pull request, let me know. So that's the data source. I have a couple other things in the repository. I have alphabetization of the words in the list. I wrote this in Python because it was really easy to write in Python. So I can avoid duplicates and merge conflicts, and hopefully it's short enough that it's easy to understand as well. You might be able to see my comment in there that while it's easy to work with this JSON list in programming languages, I'm also working on making it easy to work with in human languages. I have a comment about the ICU localization of the words. Next, I'm going to talk about rendering, which is what I call turning words in a list into the number or representation of the gender. And I chose that word because it rhymes. So you can be rendered into buckets. You have buckets for male, female, neither male nor female, but still gendered, which is non-binary for short, declined to provide information, and no information selected. And as our collective understanding of gender advances with time, I'm hoping that I can add more buckets to more accurately represent diverse users. And I think it's also really important that we talk about how I do this, because selecting words and then having like some big corporation do something scary with them is not what you want. So my code to render these is also open source on GitHub, and I'm going to walk you through the important part of it now. So first, if no genders are selected, we say we're not sure. Then if any of the gender words selected were synonyms for declined to provide, we return that the user has declined to provide their gender. After that, if a person selects only neutral or female words, they're classified as female. Only neutral or male, they're classified as male. And only gendered words that aren't male or female, they're classified into non-binary. So using our examples from before, the androgynous cis man is male, the trans woman is female, and the queer person is non-binary. This algorithm is pretty cautious, so if someone describes themselves as a non-binary femme person, for example, we'll say we aren't sure about them since femme is marked as a female word and non-binary is marked as a non-binary word. I think that that's a lot better than incorrectly guessing what their gender might be, especially when we're using, for now, mutually exclusive buckets that we're rendering people into. I have a couple more slides. So there are some things I think that my project is great for, like turning a drop-down on a website into a more inclusive text field list type thing on a web form. But there are some things it's not good for. If you collect gender information for legal reasons or for medical reasons, you might have to ask something else that's more specific that I can't help you with. I also wrote my example in an environment that uses JavaScript. So if you're in an environment that doesn't have JavaScript that you can have rendering in real time for people, then you might have a user experience challenge that I also haven't figured out how to solve yet. There are ways you can solve this. The link I have in my slides is to an example with a lot of checkboxes. So how can you help me with this? I have this on GitHub. I have a roadmap to where I want us to go, which is I want to be able to have my project be a drop-in replacement for a drop-down into production systems, but I'm not there yet. I need some help. So you can add a word that you feel describes yourself, or you can write some code to clean up my pretty messy examples. I have issues tagged on GitHub with code, writing, and conceptual. Writing is for documentation of, for example, the thing I just described to all of you, which is not, to my knowledge, actually written down. And conceptual would be, for example, how can we make sure that when we're talking about gender, we make a distinction between the grammatical gender of words, for example, in Romance languages, where words like chair are feminine or masculine, and then the gender identity of people, which we are describing with these words. There's one more thing I need help with. I could be totally wrong about this. I want to hear it if I am, and I want to hear how we can make my modeling of this and my solution to this problem better in a way that helps everyone together. Outside of working on my specific project, there's something you can help me with too. Go to your company and ask them about how they collect gender information. Start a conversation with the people you work with. So I'm going to use an example. I work for Meetup, as I have mentioned, and when I started at Meetup a little over a year ago, the field looks like it does on, I'm going to mix up left and right because it's different in front of me, but it's the one that says other. So we have this drop down that said other, and I was like, this sucks, we should change this. So I talked to a lot of people about it at work, and a lot of them had different reasons for why we wanted it to be one way or not another. The data team, the trust and safety team, the international team. And so I talked to them and I thought about what they told me, why they had concerns about changing it to a text field. And out of those conversations, I started working on Gender Amender. And then a couple months after I started working on Gender Amender, there was a hackathon at our work, an internal hackathon where we work on projects related to our site that we think are cool, that we wouldn't get to do as part of our day jobs. So as part of that, I implemented Gender Amender into this location on our page. And so instead of selecting other, you would be able to type what you wanted. And this actually won the prize at our hackathon. I was really happy about that. It didn't mean that I could launch it, but it did mean that a couple months after that, I could finally convince enough people that we should change it from saying other, which as I've said is othering, and we don't want to call people that. So I changed it, and now it says non-binary and none of these choices in English, and the equivalent translation of that in the other languages we support. So the moral of the story is that you can take small steps, and you don't have to solve everything right away, but you can make the world a better place if you think about it and talk to people about it, and I hope that you do. So I have a couple things I want to acknowledge. I want to thank some people by name. My friend Rowan helped me with Gender Amender. My friend Kristen helped me with these slides. My friend Sumana also helped me with these slides. She's in the audience, thank you. And there's something else I want to thank. I'm not the first person to work in this field. There's a lot of people talking about gender in forums. And my default when I think about people working on tech projects is that I think of a cisgender person, but a lot of the people working on this are of necessity transgender because this is a problem that affects them disproportionately, and I want to thank them all. And I don't know most of them, so I'm not going to read you a big long list of names. I have a blog post up on my personal blog, and I'm going to be putting a link to it on the official Meetup Engineering blog soon. And I have links to all their work, and I want to credit them and uplift their work. So thank you. This is how you can contact me. I think we've got time for questions.
If you would like to ask Anne a question, we've got a microphone right here, and she'd be happy to take them.
I have a question. I'm short. You mentioned that meetup.com, you can set a gender of your meetup group. Is that like something that you recognize internally, or is there a setting somewhere because we can't find it?
This is internally. When we have the groups started, they go through moderation by our community team, and the community team reads your description and your name and picks from there.
How can we make sure that our tech meetup group is not male?
It's not.
Okay.
I can tell you that if it doesn't specifically say in your description, this group is for men only, it is not male.
Awesome.
And because we have people doing this.
Awesome. Thank you. I was just
Yeah.
paranoid.
Yeah.
Hi, great talk.
Thank you.
While I was in the audience, I took a quick look at dictionary.com. I looked up the definition of gender, looked up the definition of gender identity. As you might imagine, they're two very different definitions. Moving forward, as we continue to advance the web and make it more inclusive, isn't it good to be mindful that for many applications like social media, like Meetup, gender identity is a more useful piece of information than gender? But still, for other applications, like if I'm Blue Cross Blue Shield, if I'm an auto insurance company, gender would be more useful to me. So there are other applications where we should prefer gender to gender identity because that might not be a useful piece of information.
Yeah, that's true. As I said in my talk, we should think about why we're asking and what we want to know, and we should be clear about that. And I also would like to say that I feel that if you are a health company like Blue Cross Blue Shield, you might need to know gender, but you probably also need to know gender identity. And you probably, like I said, you need to be careful about what you do with those in a way that I personally don't think that people are thinking about right now if they're at Blue Cross Blue Shield or
Okay.
some other healthcare monolith.
But small part two, if that's the case, then shouldn't we separate, okay, I can't go do a part two? Okay, shouldn't we still keep distinct the terms gender versus gender identity? Because sometimes there are instances where gender is useful, and then what word would we pick instead of, if we use this gender identity to like? Oh, okay, all right, there you go.
Yeah,
Thank you.
so sometimes you might need to know. I think that, like I said, you need to be clear about what you're asking. I don't think that people are being clear enough. And I think that even if you're a big healthcare company, you probably don't need to where do you get that information? And what are you doing with that information?
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for your talk. I really appreciated the topic
Thanks.
that I didn't know much about. So I'm curious as to how you test this to make sure that people who are using this system actually are getting the words and the pieces together that they actually expect.
Yeah, so you might have noticed when I did the demo that I had a line right beneath the list of words you had chosen that said, this is what we think of from the words you have chosen. That's one way to do it. It is my hope that if people saw the list of words, and saw that they didn't feel what it had gotten out was right, that they would come to GitHub and tell me. I also think that this is largely a theoretical question right now, and I think that right now the logic is very simple, and I want to keep it simple.
Very cool. I just, being a data scientist, I look at that and I was like, oh, we should actually go out and find a way to actually test this in aggregate and things like that. So we should talk. But
Yeah.
it looks very exciting work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for your talk. I often am integrating third-party code or data that strictly includes binary gender. And I'm wondering, you mentioned in your talk about changing this at Meetup where you work. Do you have any recommendations on bringing this up with another organization where you don't directly have any kind of influence other than maybe someone's email address and be like, hey, can we improve this in some way?
That's a good question, and I think that as with anything that involves people, it's hard. So I don't know if I have any specific recommendations. I know my blog post, like I mentioned, has a lot of resources that I used, and hopefully some of them you will find something that you could send as a link, for example. But it's a hard problem.
Hi, Anne. Good talk.
Hi.
Yay. So one thing that you mentioned was that in your negotiation and coming to consensus with other teams at Meetup, one of them was the data team. That seems to make sense. People need to be able to munch data. One of them was localization, internationalization, language. That makes sense. I was curious about the safety team, what concerns they had about changing other to non-binary or, I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact phrasing.
Yeah.
And how you took that into consideration.
So the main concern they had was that if we had an open text field, bad actors would be able to write things in it that were mean and not actually legitimate, like someone trying to describe their gender, but were insults or hate speech of some kind. And in my example that I just demonstrated, you're only actually able to select from the list of words. So that's one way to address that problem. I personally feel also that if you're proactive with moderation, you can address that problem. But that's a hard problem too, moderation, that is.
Okay, let's thank Anne again. Thank you.
Thank you.